Welcome back to Public Sector Voices with Emily Rodgers. On today's episode, we're joined by leader of Manchester City Council, Sir Richard Leese. Richard was knighted for his services to local government after overseeing the 10-year regeneration of the city after the IRA bomb of 1996, and is also chair of the North West Regional Leaders Board. Welcome to the show, Richard. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Glad to be here.
So you've been leader of our city for 24 years now. Can you take us on a quick trip down memory lane and the kind of journey that you've been on with Manchester in that time?
Well, I think you need to try and remember Manchester in 1996 or even for the decade before that. And it was then a city that had a complete economic collapse in the early 80s, lost most of its traditional industry and the jobs that went with it. It had had population decline for probably around 40 years, and that population decline was continuing. So you could go around parts of particularly North and East Manchester and see whole streets of houses boarded up. We were closing schools because they didn't have enough pupils. It was a place that was very much in decline. Now, the reverse of that did start before I became leader, although at the time I became leader, we were still facing population decline. But the real task was how we reverse that. And clearly fundamental to that was rebuilding a new economy to replace that old industrial economy, getting people back into work and starting to grow the population so that we could support all the amenities, including schools, including health centres and so on, that we needed to be a healthy city to live in. And that's really been the 24-year journey so far, is how we've done that. And it's still a long way to go. You can basically measure the decline of Manchester probably over about 75 years. This wasn't an overnight collapse, although that period in the early 80s was pretty sharp decline. Rebuilding it's not overnight either, but it's been 24 years of rebuild and we're still in that process.
And do you worry that you're going to have to start all over again now, or is it not kind of ever going to get to that point?
It's never a finished journey, but I don't think we're going to go back to where we were in 1996. We are facing probably a recession that will be as bad as anything certainly I've seen, if not worse than anything I've seen. But overall, our economy and the state of the city is in a far better place than it was in order to be able to respond to that. I think we're a far more resilient city now. We have a far more diverse economy. So while some bits of it are probably going to be hit pretty badly, other bits are going to continue to thrive and grow. That's not a position we were in previously.
So what do you attribute the success to then over the past 20 years?
There isn't a single element within this. Clearly, I think there was a period in the late 90s, the early part of this century, where a lot of it was about rebuilding the confidence of the city, getting back the belief that this is a city that can do things. And by doing that, once you believe you can do things, you do things. And that self-confidence has been a really important factor. I think some of the things that we've invested in, for example, arts and culture, have been about making the city a more attractive place to live, bringing people back to live in the city centre, using the strengths we've got, particularly the strengths in our universities around digital, around advanced materials, life sciences. So building an economy that is in the growth sectors of the future, using real strengths that we already had. I think improving educational standards within the city, making sure our young people are better prepared for jobs in those sorts of sectors. So there is not a single answer to this. I think there are a whole range of things that we've done that brought together have led to a repopulation of the city, and a city that is vastly better than it was 24 years ago. Although, again, be quite clear, it might be vastly better than it was 24 years ago. It's still nowhere near where we want it to be.
And over the past 20 odd years, what has been a more personal highlight for you?
The personal highlights of the journey. I think it is actually being able to walk around the city and having the pride in it. I could remember going back into the 80s. I might go to another European city and come back thinking, "Oh, I wish Manchester was like that."
Yeah.
Now I go to other European cities and think Manchester's better than that, and
Oh,
it's and most of them as well. And it's really it is being able to walk around with real pride in what we've been able to achieve over the last couple of decades.
it's funny you should say that because in the podcast with Nick Forbes the other week, I asked him if he ever goes to other cities and thinks, I wish I had that for our city. Is there any city that you look at and think, I wish we had that for Manchester?
I quite like New York's Museum of Modern Art. That would be quite nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
of course there are. You learn from other places and from all over the world and try and take bits from them. But I think it's really, really important that we've been able to rebuild Manchester in a way that's maintained its own character, its distinctiveness.
yeah,
Yeah, when I say I'd like the Museum of Modern Art, which I would, is I don't want us to be New York either. We are Manchester, and I want to make sure that we maintain a very distinctive character as Manchester. So uh, I suppose developments like the factory, still under construction, it is about not taking things from other places, but doing things that have like the same sort of scale and significance, but having
yeah,
them as unique to Manchester rather than pale imitations of something somewhere else.
definitely like our own version of it.
It's the thing about the factory is that although it is a challenge, it is something that nowhere else will have, and that's I think where we want to be as a city. National Graphene Centre. It is those things that are unique to Manchester.
Mm. And I know obviously the list will probably be very long, but we're facing a pandemic. What has been the most challenging thing about it from your role?
Uh, I think it's what we've had to do as a council, really.
Mhm.
That first of all, there was an enormous task early on about freeing up bed capacity in our hospitals for more intensive care cases. So, a fantastic job done by our local care organisation in being able to discharge people who didn't need to be into hospital, if necessary, into a care situation. It's something like 4 or 5 times the rate that we would normally do that.
Yeah.
A massive exercise in supporting vulnerable or shielded people. And that list is about 21,000 people at the moment who are receiving some form of support organised by the council. Getting testing facilities in place. And I have to say that government has been pretty chaotic about these things. And if we hadn't taken our own action over testing, our own action over PPE, then I think the position would have been far, far worse. Trying to maintain important services. And it's worth bearing in mind that whilst a lot of people can work from home, if you're a refuse collection worker, you can't work from home. If you're a domiciliary care worker, you can't work from home. There are a whole range of people providing public services that have been out there every day, continuing to provide those public services. So keeping those things going has been really, really important. So, like most things we do, that there aren't single uh, things you say, well, that's it. There's a whole
Mm.
range of stuff that we have to do as a local authority. And basically, it is the local authority that's kept the city going over the last 3 months. I know our health colleagues have done an absolutely phenomenal job in treating sick people, but what's kept everyday life going is largely, not just in Manchester, but it's local councils.
Yeah, and staying on the refuse collection vehicles, I know that Manchester's working really hard to kind of take steps to tackle the climate emergency, and you've got the big push for active travel, and obviously the more the emission-free vehicles that we're using instead to collect rubbish and things like that. Can you talk us through where you see Manchester in the future when it comes to climate change and tackling that problem?
We've committed to being a zero carbon city. We've set a date of 2038 at the latest for that, if we can bring it forward, that we're going to try and bring it forward. We've recognised that if we're going to meet that 2038 deadline, then we have to do an awful lot in the first 5 years of that. Now, clearly, the COVID-19 epidemic has one of its few positive things is it has reduced emissions at quite a rapid rate. But we all know that that is going to return unless we do something about it. So the priority is to do something. And refuse collection, we're due to renew half our fleet at the moment. And that will turn into an electric fleet. All the new vehicles will be all electric vehicles. And I think that's just part of what we need to do to create the zero carbon city. But as we've been discussing recovery plans, and particularly economic recovery plans, because clearly if we don't get people back to work and we can't keep people in work, that will have just as bad an impact on their health as COVID-19 has been having.
Yeah.
But we're quite clear that in doing that is that we're not going to lower our standards around things like zero carbon, because actually to do so would be trying to get short-term gains for long-term loss. So our recovery will be based very much on the principles that we've established previously on high-quality development, on zero carbon development, of promoting active lifestyles, of getting more people to use public transport. I know that's a real problem at the moment, but that's where we have to be, that the only sustainable way of moving hundreds of thousands of people around is mass transit, and we have to get that going. But it has to be clean. It has to be low emission. Ideally, it has to be electric, and that electric has to be zero carbon electricity as well. That's the journey we need to go on.
What kind of opportunities and jobs do you see to come from the kind of green economy?
Well, I think there are going to be a massive range of jobs, and the most obvious one, and one that will probably occupy more people than anything else, is retrofitting. Most of our building stock that we've got now will still be here in 2038, probably in 2050. Most of it is not really good on its environmental qualities. So retrofitting that's going to be a major task. Finding the money for it will be a major task as well. But there are going to be a massive amount of jobs, not just in the retrofitting, but also in developing the materials and making the materials for that. So we want to be in that. We have real expertise in the city in advanced materials. So I would expect that we'll play an active role, as we are doing, using materials like graphene to develop those new, more sustainable materials. So there are going to be jobs doing that. Health might be a big issue now, but health's always a big issue. So I do expect to see lots of people working, promoting health, and again, promoting healthy lifestyles is going to be part of building a zero carbon city. I think historically we've tended to see the health service as a sickness service. For a city like Manchester, the biggest task we face is not curing sick people, although that's a big and important task. It is doing those things that prevent people getting sick in the first place. And that, again, is going to be a big part of how we build a greener, cleaner city.
Yeah, and I mean, on a personal level, I've been really happy with the news of the pedestrianisation of Deansgate and, other hotspots like Thomas Street. I think they can really make a difference to active travel and the way people enjoy the city, really. How likely is it that those kind of features will become permanent for the city once this pandemic is over?
Well, those will become permanent. I have no doubt about that. We have a very, I think, clear strategy, which we're consulting, saying that not just the city centre, but other district centres, the other places where people gather, need to become far more pedestrian-dominated spaces. So that's what we're aiming to do, to create more space for people to enjoy, not having it just as transport space, although in terms of the shifts that have happened over the past few months, sadly, people coming out of public transport, the biggest move has been into the private car. We clearly want to be able to reverse that, But by far the second biggest move has been for people walking, which is really, really positive, and we want to respond very positively to making sure that there is safe space for people to walk.
Yeah, because walking and cycling will have a direct impact on people's health as well. So it kind of all fits into the whole wider strategy.
Well, they do, and I'm a cyclist, and I've actually been doing more leisure cycling over the last few months than I normally do. But usually I'm a commuter cyclist. But if you look at the numbers, this is pre-COVID, but in the morning rush hour, the number of walkers to cyclists were about 7 to 1. In that 10 to 12 period, it's about 13 to 1. And cyclists are important, but I'm going to risk a little bit of controversy here. Walkers are more important, and there are far more of them.
Well, yeah, it's more realistic for people to walk to work, I suppose.
Well, that's what people are doing. I think it is that behaviour. What we really want to do, of course, is reduce the number of people using a private car for commuting, using a private car for school journeys. I have to recognise that some people for their work need to use a private car. Some people, particularly people who might be mobility impaired, need to use a car. And so I don't think we can be saying that they need to be completely eliminated. That's just not realistic or even desirable. Although, of course, if they're all electric cars, and I have to confess my car isn't electric, but if we move to zero carbon cars, that would make a big difference as well. But really what we need to be able to be doing is to get people into walking, into cycling, and into mass transit, and out as far as possible. I guess the private car becoming a leisure vehicle rather than a clean leisure vehicle rather than a get to work vehicle.
Can you see yourself with an electric vehicle in the future?
Oh, yeah, yes, I can. Although I would claim I compensate is that my mileage is really, really low anyway. So
yeah.
I occasionally have to ask the question, I don't know about an electric vehicle, it's about why I have a vehicle at all, given the frequency with which I use it. So to a certain extent, I do cycle, I do walk. I'll walk into the town hall. It's only about 3.5 miles, but if it's not too hot and not too cold, pleasant day, then I'll do that. And I'm a big user of public transport as well. Or, sorry, I was until about 3 months ago, and hope to be again soon.
Yeah. And pre-pandemic, Manchester was rising to become like a rival for London, a cheaper alternative to the southeast, but still a thriving business and investment hub within the north. And we saw plenty of huge companies move their premises to within our city. Was this part of a wider plan, and where does that plan stand now?
Well, we've certainly been trying to rebuild the economy of the city. I think we have been relatively successful. And in the couple of years before COVID hit everything, we were seeing rates of growth in Manchester in jobs. And it's the jobs bit that I'm interested in, but the rate of growth in jobs that was certainly in excess of London, in excess of national averages, in excess of other cities. And I think that's a real positive for Manchester, although I have to say I don't get into the kind of rivalry with other cities. We're growing faster than you, etc.
No.
I want other places to do well as well. So, who do we trade with? We trade with other cities. So if other cities aren't doing well, we're going to do less well as well. So I want to have win-win situations. But we are, though, notwithstanding that success, still rebuilding from the economic collapses we had in the 80s and the period before that. We're still not back to, certainly as a city region, to where we want to be. So we do need to build on the success we've had and continue to operate in very much the way we were doing pre-epidemic, bearing in mind that some things will have to change as a result of the epidemic, because it's not going to go away quickly. What
kind of things can you see changing?
Well, I think the biggest single thing is that I think we are going to have a rather different attitude to hygiene in the future to perhaps what we've had in the past, which will be no bad thing, I think. But we are going to have to be, for a long time, going to have to be a bit more careful and a bit more particular.
Yeah.
I know, again, there is a talk about lots of people permanently working from home. I think a lot of businesses had introduced flexible working anyway, and with people partly working from home, partly going into the office. I'm sure that will continue. But I know from a lot of people I've spoken to who, like me, are working from home, we are absolutely desperate not to work from home to be able to get back to a proper working environment. So,
Yeah, it has been nice to prove that there is another option, but it's not the ideal option.
well, it's not. It's also, we know that from the numbers that lockdown, working from home, that isolation has had a fairly negative impact on a lot of people's mental health, as particularly a lot of younger people's mental health as well. I think it's demonstrated that it is not an entirely healthy lifestyle to be locked away in your own house doing everything from there.
Yeah. And going on from what we were talking about with the rise of Manchester and inward investment and things like that, there are some people that would complain that Manchester's becoming unaffordable for locals, particularly with city centre living. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think there are two sides to this. First of all, we have been repopulating the city. So if you look at all the accommodation that has been built around the city centre, although probably about 40% of it is people who've moved from elsewhere within the city, a lot of this is building the workforce of the future. It is the repopulation of the city. If you look at who lives in a lot of these apartments, which I've done in some detail for some of them, a lot of it is ordinary working people. We don't have 25,000 super rich people in Manchester all living in luxury flats. And
Mm.
a lot of these, basically, they are the modern workforce. They are the people who are working in quite often arts and the entertainment industries, who are working in the visitor service industries, who are working in digital industries, who are working in life science industries, science-based industries. This is basically, it is workers' accommodation for the workforce of the future. What we lack, and this has changed over the last 20 years, and I think in some respects it's good news, is that there are still large numbers of families on low incomes for which we don't have enough accommodation. This has been compounded by right to buy policies, which means that every year we lose about 500 of our most affordable family homes to right to buy, and they are not being replaced. And
Mm.
that is the real problem. If all of those right to buy homes have been replaced on a like to like basis, and the reason we haven't done it is government hasn't funded that replacement, that we wouldn't have the sort of problems we have with housing for low income families. And I think we've got to find a way of putting that right, basically. We're proposing to set up our own housing delivery vehicle. And
Mm.
part of the reason we're doing that is to be able to provide more of that housing that is at uh, local housing allowance rents or below, to be able to provide high quality, secure housing for those families on low income who need it. And look, the problem is not the housing we have been building, which is all housing we needed because it's all full.
Mm.
So it is meeting a real need. The problem is the housing that we've not been building and we haven't been able to build. It's not because we don't want to, it's because we haven't been able to. And it is that housing to replace, in particular, all the housing that's been lost to right to buy.
That's really interesting. And what sector would you say then is the one that is going to need the most support coming out of this? Which one do you worry about the most?
I think a few sectors are going to need support, but I guess the ones that will need most support are the ones that involve people coming together in close proximity. So, probably the extreme example is going to be elements of the entertainment industry. It's a bit difficult to have a gig, for example, where people are standing 2 meters apart, or
Yeah.
theatres are not going to be viable with people sitting in alternate rows, 3 seats. apart. It's going to be those industries. I think arts and entertainment are not the only example, but they're a very good example of it. The industries that are, I think, a really, really important part of giving us quality of life, but can't operate on a socially distanced basis.
Yeah, and we've heard Andy Burnham talk a lot as well about the regional R rate. Do you think that we need to be able to make our own decisions based on the R rate in your own region?
Well, the R rate is quite difficult. The fact that the R rate appears to be hovering around the 1 mark for the Northwest is cause for concern. But I think we also have to worry that a lot of the data is fairly poor anyway. But by comparison, if we were to get the data down to a more local level, if that's the R rate for the northwest of England, rather, for the city of Manchester, we have the second lowest incidence of COVID in the northwest of England. So, by and large, we are probably one of the healthiest places for people to come back to work into. And I think that ought to give people some reassurance about coming back to work, is that their risk is probably lower in Manchester than it is in other parts of the region. What we have to do, of course, is keep it that way. The really important thing is, yes, to encourage people back to work, but make sure that the risk assessments are done properly and Public Health England guidance is followed properly, and they will make it safe for people to come back to work.
That's really good news. I hadn't heard that anywhere. It's something that we should be really shouting about.
I think so as well, because clearly there are enormous variations in incidence of COVID-19. But yeah, Manchester's fairly consistently had a fairly low incidence of COVID. But again, let's not get too carried away, because we are still talking about people who have caught COVID in Manchester, and we're still talking about people who've died in Manchester. It's not that there is no risk, it is that there is a lower risk. And how do we deal with that is that we do it by acting in a safe and careful way. It's not time to go wild yet.
No, we still have to be very careful.
Yeah.
So before we end then, can you share with us what are the things that you miss most about life before the pandemic, and what kind of things are you itching to do again?
Well, I miss going into my office, to be honest. But I do all of those. I go to galleries, I go to gigs, I go to film, I go to theatre. I like going and eating with friends or drinking with friends in bars and restaurants. The biggest part of it is that I miss all of that social, cultural mixing with people part of life, because you can do stuff on Zoom, but I've had dinner with people on Zoom. It's not quite the same, I can tell you. The other thing is, people invite you for dinner and you have to do your own cooking. What's that all about?
Yeah, and I feel like the social side of things as well is such a huge part of Manchester's culture.
Well, absolutely. I think one of the things we've supported, and other people have created it, but we've supported it, is a really positive quality of life for people who live in Manchester. City centre, areas like Castlefield, like the Northern Quarter, more recently Anco. It's also some of our neighbourhoods outside the city as well. It's not just the city centre. It's become a really good place to live. But part of the reason it's become a really good place to live is because we have got rich culture and we have got a rich social scene within the city. And again, rebuilding that's got to be part of how we rebuild our city post-crisis.
Absolutely. And I think that's the perfect way to round off. Thank you so much for speaking on the show today. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks very much, Emily, and good luck to you. And you stay well as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I will do. You too. I know I might be biased, but it is amazing to see Manchester's progress since that bomb in 1996, which I read this week was actually the largest peacetime explosion. So it's impressive to see how Manchester's recovered from that, and no doubt will do it again from the current crisis. Coming up on next week's episode, we'll be speaking to the Mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees. Not to be missed, I'll see you then.